When 10-year-old Delaney Marsh pressed herself against the cinder-block wall of the Jefferson Elementary School gymnasium in Cedar Falls, Iowa, on a Thursday evening in early December, 40 minutes before the winter concert was scheduled to begin, and grabbed the sleeve of a leather vest belonging to a biker named Thomas Hatch, who had wandered into the wrong hallway looking for the restroom, and pulled him down to her level with both hands and whispered 4 words directly into his ear with the urgent precision of someone delivering information they had been waiting to deliver for a very long time. Don't let her sing. The man's first reasonable assumption was that he had stumbled into some variety of child drama, the kind of operatic social conflict that existed at high intensity in elementary schools, and that adults were periodically enlisted into and from which they were wise to extract themselves quickly and with diplomacy. He had been to enough school events as a volunteer with the Heartland Writers MC to understand that the emotional weather of children in the hour before a performance was its own climate system, pressurized and unpredictable, and that whispered conspiracies in hallways were not necessarily the emergencies they presented themselves as. But then Delaney said the second part. She said, "She'll hurt herself if you let her." And her eyes, which were the pale gray of a winter sky, and which were entirely steady and entirely serious in the way that eyes were when they were reporting something observed rather than felt, did not waver or dramatize or ask for anything except to be believed. And Thomas Hatch, who had been a foster parent for 9 years and who had learned in those 9 years to distinguish between a child performing distress and a child reporting it, felt something settle in his chest with the quiet certainty of a correct diagnosis. This was not drama. This was information. This, and the girl delivering it, had chosen him specifically out of everyone in the hallway because she had decided he was the kind of person who would receive it correctly. The question of whether she was right about that was one that Thomas intended to answer in the affirmative. The Jefferson Elementary Winter Concert was the kind of event that small Midwestern cities did with a particular wholehearted commitment that larger cities had largely lost: 300 families in folding chairs, a gymnasium decorated by 4th graders with construction paper snowflakes and hand-lettered signs, a borrowed risers arrangement that the music teacher had been requesting be replaced for 6 consecutive years, and the particular festive tension of children who had been rehearsing since October and were now 40 minutes from the moment that rehearsal had been preparing them for. The parking lot had been filling since 5:30. The gymnasium doors had opened at 6. The concert was scheduled for 7. And the hallways between the main entrance and the performance space had the purposeful chaos of families navigating with coats and programs and small children and the various logistical complications of public gatherings in cold weather. Thomas Hatch had come to the concert because the Heartland Writers MC was providing volunteer support for the event, a service they had offered Jefferson Elementary for 3 consecutive years as part of their community partnership with the Cedar Falls School District, which involved showing up for events that needed extra hands, helping with setup and breakdown, managing parking, keeping hallways clear during performances, the unglamorous and necessary work of making public gatherings function. Thomas had been doing this kind of work with the club for 6 of his 8 years as a member, and he found genuine satisfaction in it. The particular satisfaction of useful labor performed in service of something that mattered to a community. He was 51 years old, a broad man with a close-cropped gray beard and the careful, unhurried movements of someone who had learned through long experience that urgency and haste were different things, and that the first was often served better by the second's absence. He had a daughter of his own, 23 now, and the 9 years of foster parenting had expanded his understanding of children into something more varied and more nuanced than biological parenthood alone would have provided. He had fostered 14 children over those years, ranging from infancy to adolescence, and what he had taken from that experience above all else was a specific attunement to the communications of children who had learned that direct communication was unsafe, who had developed the lateral, oblique, whispered vocabulary of people who needed to say something important and needed to say it in a way that could be walked back if the reception was wrong. He had been looking for the restroom because the gymnasium's layout was not immediately intuitive, and he had taken a wrong turn past the music room and found himself in a hallway that served the backstage area where the performing students were assembled, which was off limits to non-staff adults during the pre-concert period, a fact he had been about to self-correct when the sleeve grab happened. He looked down at the girl. She was small for 10, with dark hair pulled back in a braid that was slightly uneven, the kind of braid assembled by someone who was trying rather than someone who was practiced, and she was wearing a white blouse and dark pants that were the uniform for performing students, and her shoes were the patent leather shoes that children wore to formal occasions and that were clearly uncomfortable, and that she had apparently decided were worth the discomfort for reasons she had prioritized above comfort. She had the pale gray eyes and the still watchful face of a child who had learned to observe carefully before acting. He crouched down. He said, "Tell me." She looked at him for one full second with the assessing look of someone checking whether the investment of trust was going to be worthwhile. Then she said, "My sister Cora. She's backstage. She has a solo in the concert tonight." Thomas said, "Okay." Delaney said, "She hasn't eaten anything today. She threw up this morning and last night, and she told Mom she was fine, and Mom believed her. Because Mom thinks this is just nerves, but it's not nerves. It's the thing that's been happening since September." She said this last part with a specific weight, the thing that's been happening, that suggested she had been naming it internally for some time. Thomas said, "What's been happening since September?" Delaney said, "She stopped eating." "Not completely. She eats enough that you don't notice if you're not paying attention, but I share a room with her and I notice. She hides food. She says she ate, but she didn't. She exercises at night when she thinks I'm asleep. She does it quietly so Mom and Dad don't hear. She counts things, bites, steps. She's gotten very thin, and her choir uniform had to be taken in twice, and the teacher thought it was a growth thing, but it's not a growth thing." She said all of this in the same quiet, sequential way, not rushing, not performing urgency, just reporting accurately. The hallway around them had the background noise of a school in pre-event mode, distant voices and the sound of instruments being tuned somewhere, and the particular acoustic quality of a building that was more full than usual. Delaney kept her voice below it easily, calibrated to reach Thomas and no further. Thomas said, "Have you told your parents?" Delaney's jaw moved slightly. "I told Mom in October. I showed her the food Cora had hidden in our closet, and I told her about the nighttime exercises. Mom said I was being dramatic and that Cora was going through a phase and that I should focus on my own things." She paused. "Dad travels for work. He's here tonight, but he's usually not home. I tried to tell him on the phone last month. He said to trust Mom's judgment." Thomas said, "Has anyone talked to Cora directly about it? A doctor, a counselor?" Delaney shook her head. "Mom made an appointment with the pediatrician in November, but then Cora had a good week and Mom canceled it. She said she'd rescheduled, but I don't think she did." She looked at Thomas steadily. "Cora is 12. She's 2 years older than me. She used to eat normal. She used to eat a lot, actually. She loved food. She used to say food was one of the best things about being alive." She said this last sentence with a flatness that conveyed precisely how far the current situation was from it. Thomas was quiet for a moment. He was doing several things at once in the way that he had learned to do several things at once in these moments, receiving what Delaney was telling him, assessing its credibility, which was high, noting the specific details that indicated careful observation over time rather than a single alarming incident, and beginning to think about what the next step needed to be. He was also aware of something else, the particular quality of what it had cost this girl to find someone to tell this to. She had tried twice and been dismissed twice by both parents, and had held this information in the shared bedroom she occupied with her sister for at least 2 months, watching and knowing and having nowhere useful to put the knowing, and had tonight, 40 minutes before a school concert, grabbed the sleeve of a stranger in a hallway because she had looked at him and made a decision. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what time it is where you are, because this story is going to ask you to think about the people in your own life who might be trying to tell you something sideways, who have tried the direct way and been dismissed and are now looking for the right sleeve to grab. We upload a new story every single day on this channel, and every one of them starts with someone deciding to pay attention. He said, "Why me? Why did you choose me?" Delaney said. Because you're not a teacher, and you're not a parent, and you're not someone who already has an opinion about my family." She paused. "And because you look like someone who has seen hard things and is not scared of them." Thomas looked at this 10-year-old who had just delivered a precise psychological assessment of why he was the optimal recipient of information that two adults who loved her sister had declined to receive. He said, "You've been waiting for the right person," she said. "Since October. I kept looking for someone who would believe me without needing me to convince them," he said. "I believe you." She looked at him. Her pale gray eyes held something that was not relief exactly, not yet, but was the precursor to it, the recognition that the door she had been trying to open had finally found a key. He said, "What's your sister's name again?" "Cora," she said. "Cora Marsh," he said. "And where is she right now?" "Backstage," Delaney said. "She's in the second row of the choir. She has the solo in the third song. It's called the Snow Song. She wrote it herself." She paused. "She's a really good singer. She used to love singing, too. Now she practices the solo at night instead of eating dinner, and I can hear her getting lightheaded when she holds the long notes. She stops and starts again, and I can hear her getting dizzy from the bed." Thomas stood. He put his hand briefly on Delaney's shoulder, the way he had learned to do with children who needed contact to confirm that the communication had been received and was being acted on. Not a performance of reassurance, but a simple physical acknowledgement. He said, "You did the right thing telling me. I need you to stay here for a few minutes." "Can you do that?" Delaney said. "Are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" He said. "I'm going to find a way to make sure Cora gets the help she needs. The conversation with your parents is part of that, but it's not the first step. The first step is making sure someone with the right training knows what's happening." He paused. "There's a school nurse or counselor here tonight for the event. I'm going to find them right now," Delaney said. "The nurse is Mrs. Delacroix. She has the table near the gym entrance with the first aid kit. She's nice. She listened to me once when I hurt my ankle in PE." She actually listened. She actually listened. Thomas noted the emphasis and what it carried. He said, "I'll find Mrs. Delacroix, and then we're going to handle this the right way. Not a scene, not a disruption, not anything that embarrasses Cora or makes tonight worse for her. Just the right people knowing what they need to know." Delaney looked at him. She said, "Cora doesn't know I told you. She'll be upset." Thomas said, "She might be. For a little while. And then she'll understand why you did it." He paused. "That's what it looks like when someone who loves you does the hard thing." Delaney was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She's my best friend. I know she's also my sister, but she's actually my best friend too. And she's disappearing and no one will see it, and I don't know how to make them see it." Thomas said, "I see it. And I'm going to make sure the right people see it too. Go back to your class area now. Act normal. Let me do the rest." She looked at him for one final moment with those winter sky eyes, and then she nodded, a small, decisive nod, the nod of someone who has placed their weight on a structure and felt it hold, and she turned and walked back down the hallway toward the backstage area with the patent leather shoes making small, precise sounds on the linoleum floor. Thomas watched her go. Then he turned and walked toward the gym entrance, moving with the particular kind of purpose that looked calm from the outside, and was not calm at all on the inside, to find a nurse named Mrs. Delacroix who actually listened. Mrs. Delacroix was exactly where Delaney had said she would be, at a folding table near the gymnasium entrance with a first aid kit and a clipboard, and the composed, watchful presence of a school nurse at a public event, which was the presence of someone who hoped nothing would be needed and was fully prepared for something to be. She was in her late 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the specific quality of calm that came from decades of being the person in the room who dealt with what other people panicked about. She was talking to a parent when Thomas approached, and she registered his approach with the peripheral awareness of someone accustomed to monitoring multiple things simultaneously. And she concluded the parent conversation with the graceful efficiency of a person who understood how to close one thing cleanly in order to open another. Thomas said, "My name is Thomas Hatch. I'm a Heartland Riders volunteer for tonight's event. I need 60 seconds of your time, and it's important." Mrs. Delacroix looked at him. She looked at the vest and the patches and the gray beard and the careful steadiness of his face, and she made a rapid assessment that arrived at the same conclusion Delaney had arrived at by a slightly different route, which was that this was a person worth 60 seconds. She said, "Go ahead." He gave her what Delaney had given him, compressed and sequenced, the way he had learned to relay information that needed to move efficiently between people. 12-year-old student in the choir, named Cora Marsh, presenting signs of restrictive eating behavior since September at minimum, documented by younger sister who shares her room, hidden food, concealed exercise, significant weight loss requiring 2 alterations to her choir uniform, vomiting morning and evening today, nothing eaten, solo in the 3rd song of tonight's concert. Younger sister reported to both parents and was dismissed twice. He said all of this in 45 seconds, and then he stopped and let Mrs. Delacroix do what she needed to do with it. She had been writing on the back of a program from the stack on her table. Not notes exactly, more the physical act of recording that some people use to anchor their attention while they listened. She stopped writing and looked at Thomas and said, "The sister told you this tonight?" "Yes." "How old is the sister?" 10. She's been looking for the right person to tell since October. Mrs. Delacroix looked at her clipboard. She looked at the gymnasium doors. She said, "I know Cora Marsh. She's been in my office twice this fall, once for a headache in October and once in November for dizziness during PE." She said this with the particular quality of a professional connecting retrospective dots that were forming a pattern she had not previously had full context for. "Both times I asked if she was eating and drinking enough, and both times she said yes." She paused. She was very convincing. Thomas said, 12-year-olds who are protecting a behavior they know is wrong often are." Mrs. Delacroix looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating their assessment of a person upward. She said, "What's your background?" "Foster parent, 9 years, 14 kids." He said it simply, without emphasis. "You learn to read the ones who are hiding something from themselves as much as from you." Mrs. Delacroix soured, "I need to see her before the concert. I have grounds given the prior visits. I can make it a wellness check, low key. In my office if I can get her there without making it visible to the whole choir." She was already moving, gathering her bag with the automatic efficiency of someone shifting from standby to active. She said, "The parents are here tonight?" Thomas said, "Both of them. Mother and father." The sister said the father usually travels for work and is rarely home, so he may not have full context even beyond what the sister described to him. "Possibly," Thomas said. Mrs. Delacroix said, "I'll need to speak to them after I see Cora. That conversation's going to depend on what I find." She looked at Thomas. "Are you staying?" "It's not my conversation to be in," Thomas said, "but I'll be wherever you need me." She nodded. She said, "Wait here. I'm going backstage. I'll send someone for you if I need you." She paused at the edge of moving. How did the younger sister describe Cora? Before all of this, what was she like? Thomas said, "She said Cora used to love food, used to say it was one of the best things about being alive, and that she used to love singing too." Mrs. Delacroix was quiet for one moment. Then she said, "I'll be back." And she went. Thomas stood near the entrance table and watched the gymnasium continue to fill. Families in good coats finding their rows, fathers lifting children onto shoulders for a better view, grandparents with the particular tender attention of people who had made the drive for this, the warm noise of a community gathering in winter for the specific purpose of watching their children do something in public that the children had worked for. He watched all of it with the detached, careful attention of a man whose focus was elsewhere, in a backstage hallway where a nurse was conducting a wellness check on a 12-year-old girl with a solo in the 3rd song who had been disappearing since September, while the people who loved her looked in slightly the wrong direction. He thought about Delaney, about the 2 months she had spent in a shared bedroom watching and knowing and trying to find someone who would receive what she was trying to give them without making her convince them first. He thought about October, about the food hidden in the closet, about the mother who had said Delaney was being dramatic, and he thought about what it cost a 10-year-old to be told that the true thing she was seeing was actually a distortion of her perception, that her accurate observation was actually an excess of imagination, and to continue watching and knowing and holding it regardless. He had seen this particular dynamic in foster children, the ones who had learned that the adults around them were unreliable receivers of important information, who had developed alternative strategies for getting critical truths to the people who needed to have them. Delaney had tried the obvious routes and found them closed, and had spent 6 weeks looking for a lateral one, and had found it tonight in a man who had taken a wrong turn looking for the restroom. There was something in the specific absurdity of that Thomas found both humbling and instructive. The reminder that the right person was not always the official person or the expected person or the person with the appropriate credential, but sometimes the person who happened to be in the hallway and happened to be paying attention and happened to be the kind of person that a watchful 10-year-old looked at and decided was worth the risk. His phone vibrated. A text from the club's event coordinator asking where he was. He replied that he was near the main entrance dealing with something and would be back on parking detail shortly. He put the phone away and stayed where he was. Mrs. Delacroix was gone for 19 minutes. When she came back through the gymnasium doors, her face had the particular composed gravity of a medical professional who has found what they were looking for and does not find it good. She came directly to Thomas and stood close enough to speak quietly. She said, "Her resting heart rate is elevated and irregular. She's cold to the touch in a climate-controlled building. Her blood pressure is low. She has visible loss of muscle mass in her arms and shoulders. When I asked her to squeeze my hands, her grip was significantly weaker than it should be for her age." She paused. She denied everything initially. Then she cried. Then she told me some of it, not all of it. "Enough," Thomas said. "Enough for what? Enough to know this has been going on longer than September. She thinks it started in the spring, but she didn't recognize it as a problem until the summer when the behaviors became more structured." She used that word, structured. She's been structuring restriction and exercise in a way that she's been able to conceal because she's intelligent and because the adults around her weren't looking for it specifically. Thomas said, "What happens now?" Mrs. Delacroix said, "I've called the on-call pediatrician at the hospital. Given the cardiac signs, I'm not comfortable waiting until tomorrow for a medical assessment. I need to speak to the parents now, before the concert starts." She looked at Thomas. "She asked about the person who sent me. She asked who told." He said, "What did you say?" I said, "Someone who cared about her." She looked at him. She said, "Tell them I'm not mad at Delaney." She said it specifically. "Tell them I'm not mad." Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. He said, "She knew it was Delaney." Mrs. Delacroix said, "Sisters know." She took a breath. She also said she can't do the solo tonight. She said she was scared to do it. She'd been scared for 2 weeks, but felt like she couldn't say so. When I told her that the solo was not going to happen tonight, that we were going to take care of her instead, she cried for 3 minutes straight. Not unhappy crying, the other kind. Thomas understood. The relief kind. The kind that came out of a person when a weight they had been holding was finally taken by someone else, when the performance of being fine was officially suspended and something more honest was allowed to replace it. He said, "Where are the parents?" Mrs. Delacroix said, "I asked the event coordinator to find them and bring them to my office. They should be there now." She looked at Thomas. "You don't have to come to that conversation." He said, "I know. I'll be here if you need anything," she said. "Thank you for taking the time to find me." A lot of people would have assumed it was nerves and moved on. Thomas said, a 10-year-old girl had been looking for the right person to tell since October. I wasn't going to be the 7th wrong one. Mrs. Delacroix looked at him for a moment with an expression that contained both recognition and something that had no precise name, but was in the family of gratitude. Then she went to find the Marsh parents. The concert started at 7:04, 4 minutes late, which for a school winter concert was essentially on time. Thomas had returned to the hallway near the gymnasium entrance and was watching the doors with the particular peripheral attention of a man waiting for additional information while maintaining the appearance of doing something else. The choir filed onto the risers in 2 rows, 32 children in white blouses and dark pants and patent leather shoes, and the focused composure of children who had been rehearsing since October and were finally in the moment the rehearsal had been for. Thomas scanned the risers and found Delaney in the second row on the left side and watched her face as the choir arranged itself, and she counted the members and found the gap where her sister should have been standing and was not. Delaney's face did something. A small, controlled movement in the jaw and the eyes that lasted less than 2 seconds, and that most people in the gymnasium would not have noticed, and that Thomas noticed because he was watching for it. It was not relief. It was not satisfaction. It was the specific expression of a person who has moved a heavy thing from one location to another and is now feeling the full weight of the movement, the effort of it, the cost, and is processing whether the destination justified the transit. Thomas held up his phone and texted her name into a search that he was not actually conducting. He did it because it gave him something to do with his hands while he waited for the concert to proceed and for Mrs. Delacroix to conclude her conversation with the Marsh parents and for the evening to become what it was going to become. The choir sang the first song and the second song, and when the third song arrived, the music teacher made a brief, warm announcement from the podium that the scheduled soloist was unable to perform her solo tonight due to a health concern, and that the choir would perform the full piece together, and there was a small ripple through the audience of the kind that happened when an expected element did not materialize, quickly absorbed into the larger warmth of the event, and the choir sang the snow song together with the particular collective sound of 31 children who had practiced it enough that the absence of the solo did not diminish the whole, and the gymnasium was warm, and the paper snowflakes turned in the air from the heating vents, and 300 families watched their children do the thing they had been preparing to do since October. If you've ever watched someone you love disappear gradually while the people who should have seen it looked slightly away, if you've ever been the person in the room who saw clearly what others were missing and didn't know how to make them see it too, subscribe to this channel and share this story. We put out a new story every day because we believe that the Delaneys of the world deserve to be heard the first time, not the 7th, and that the people willing to be the right sleeve to grab are worth finding and worth celebrating. After the concert, Thomas was helping fold chairs in the gymnasium when Mrs. Delacroix appeared at the door and made a small gesture that indicated she wanted a word. He set down the chair he was holding and went to her. She said, "I spoke to the parents for 40 minutes. The mother was defensive initially. She said she had been watching Cora closely and that the situation was being managed. She said the younger daughter had a history of catastrophizing. She said this with the particular neutrality of someone reporting a thing they found difficult to report without editorializing." Thomas said, "And the father." Mrs. Delacroix said the father had not been given the full picture. His wife had told him Cora was going through a phase and that she had it handled. When I laid out what I had observed medically tonight, the cardiac signs, the grip weakness, the temperature, he went very still in the way that fathers went still when they understood something had been happening in their household that they did not know about. She paused. He asked to see Cora immediately. He sat with her for 20 minutes in my office. She said his name when he came in. Just his name. Not a sentence. Just Dad. Thomas looked at the gymnasium, at the remaining families gathering coats and children, at the construction paper snowflakes still turning in the heating vent air. He said, "Are they going to the hospital?" "Tonight," Mrs. Delacroix said. The pediatrician had flagged the cardiac irregularity as something that needed same-night assessment. The father is taking Cora. The mother is coming separately. There are some conversations that need to happen between them that are not my business and that I hope happen with honesty. She looked at Thomas. Cora asked to see Delaney before they left. He said, "How was that?" Mrs. Delacroix was quiet for a moment. She said, "Cora hugged her sister for a long time and didn't say anything for most of it." Then she said, "I know it was you," and Delaney said yes, and Cora said, "You were right to." Thomas looked at the ceiling. He looked at the paper snowflakes. He said, "That's a remarkable thing for a 12-year-old to say in that moment." Mrs. Delacroix said, "Cora is a remarkable kid. She's sick, and she's been working very hard to hide it, and she's also, underneath all of that, someone who loves her sister, and in the moment of crisis was able to access that love accurately." She paused. "That's something to build on. That's what recovery has to work with." Thomas nodded. He thought about what Delaney had said in the hallway. "She's my best friend. I know she's also my sister, but she's actually my best friend too. And she's disappearing. He said. What happens from here? Mrs. Delacroix said. Inpatient assessment tonight. Treatment recommendation within the week, probably. It's going to be a long road. These things always are. But the road starts from where you actually are, not from where you wish you were, and now the family knows where they actually are. She looked at Thomas. That's what tonight did. It moved them from not knowing to knowing. The rest is their work to do. He said, Will Delaney be okay? She said, Delaney is one of the most capable 10-year-olds I've ever encountered in 22 years of school nursing. She's going to need support through this. She's been carrying a lot alone, and that has a cost. But she's also someone who kept looking for the right door to knock on for 2 months and did not stop looking until she found one. That kind of persistence in a 10-year-old is not nothing. That's something significant about who she is. Thomas thought about that, about the 6 weeks between October and December, about the careful watching and the silent knowing and the attempts to tell that had been turned back, and about a girl with winter sky eyes standing in a school hallway 40 minutes before a concert grabbing the sleeve of a stranger, because she had decided he was the kind of person who had seen hard things and was not scared of them. He said, She found the right door tonight. Mrs. Delacroix said, You were the right door. She found you. She, Thomas, who had spent 9 years as a foster parent learning to distinguish between performed distress and reported information, who had spent 8 years with the Heartland Riders, learning the particular value of showing up for things that needed showing up for, who had taken a wrong turn in a school hallway looking for a restroom and ended up exactly where he was supposed to be, said, She did most of the work. Mrs. Delacroix said, They usually do. The children who need help most are often the ones who have already done the most work by the time they find someone to receive it. Our job is to be receivable. She said it plainly, as a professional summarizing a principle, and Thomas heard it as both description and instruction. He went back to folding chairs. Cora Marsh was admitted to the pediatric unit of Cedar Falls Medical Center at 9:47 on a Thursday evening in December, while her sister sat in the back seat of their mother's car in the hospital parking lot and looked at the lights in the upper windows and counted them the way she counted things when she needed something to do with her mind that was not feeling. She counted 11 lit windows and then counted them again and got 12, and then accepted that the number was somewhere between 11 and 12 and that the imprecision was okay. Delaney had been counting and cataloging and observing with precision for as long as she could remember, because precision was what she had instead of certainty, and tonight, certainty was not available, but precision still was, and she held on to it the way she held on to most things, quietly and without requiring anyone else to notice. Her mother was inside. Her father was inside with Cora. Her mother and father had driven separately and had not spoken to each other in the parking lot when they arrived, and the quality of that not speaking was a specific kind that Delaney had learned to read as something larger than a single evening's conflict, something that had weight and history, and that tonight had acquired a new dimension that would take time to fully understand. She did not think about this in large terms. She thought about it the way she thought about most things, in the specific and the immediate. Her mother was inside. Her father was inside with Cora. She was in the back seat. The heater was running because her mother had left the car running for her with the heat on, which was a kindness that Delaney noted and held. She had her coat on and her patent leather shoes, which she had been wearing for 4 hours now, and which had produced 2 blisters on her left heel that she had been ignoring since the concert, and that she was continuing to ignore because blisters were not relevant information tonight. She had Cora's spare hair tie on her wrist, the purple one that Cora kept in the small dish on their shared dresser, which Delaney had put on her wrist in the backstage hallway before the concert, because she had needed something of Cora's nearby, and it was what was available. She looked at it now in the low light of the parking lot and pressed it against her wrist with 2 fingers and held it there. Her phone showed 1 text from her father, sent 20 minutes ago. Cora is okay. Doctors are with her. I'll come out soon. We love you. She had read it 4 times. The 4th time she had felt something shift in her chest in a way that was not comfortable exactly, but was different from the tightness that had been there since September. a different kind of pressure, the pressure of something moving rather than the pressure of something held still. She did not cry. She had not cried yet, and she was not sure when she would, only that when it came, it would come in its own time and would not be rushed. She thought about Thomas Hatch, about the 30 seconds in the hallway when she had looked at him and made the decision and grabbed his sleeve. She had been watching people all evening, the way she watched people at school and at the grocery store, and anywhere that people gathered, looking for the specific combination of things she had learned to look for, the person who was monitoring the room rather than their phone, who was comfortable in their own stillness, who looked at the people around them rather than through them. She had seen Thomas come down the backstage hallway, and she had watched him for a full 15 seconds before she moved, noting the way he walked, the way his eyes moved across the space, the specific quality of his attention, which was the quality of someone who was present in the way that useful people were present, not performing presence, but actually occupying the moment they were in. She had been wrong before about people. The parent at the park who had listened for 30 seconds. The teacher she had almost told in November, and then had not because something in the teacher's posture had communicated that the information would be managed rather than received. She had developed a specific and somewhat costly expertise in reading the difference between management and reception, and Thomas Hatch had had the quality of reception before she said a single word to him. She had been right about that. He had proved it by finding Mrs. Delacroix in less than 4 minutes when 2 adults who loved Cora had been unable to act on the same information for 2 months. She thought about that for a while, about why the information had moved through Thomas in the time it had taken to paralyze the people who loved Cora most. She had a theory about it that she had been assembling since October, which was that the people who loved someone most were sometimes the ones least able to see certain things clearly, because the seeing carried too much consequence. If her mother truly saw what Delaney had been seeing since September, she had to understand what it meant, and what it meant was frightening and implicated things about the family and about choices made and not made and about the management of a household when a father traveled frequently and a mother was managing more than she had resources for. The seeing wasn't just information. It was a responsibility that came with the information, and the responsibility was large and the resources felt insufficient, and so the seeing got complicated, and the complication looked like dismissal from the outside, but was something different from the inside, something more like inability than unwillingness. Delaney understood this intellectually, in the way that 10-year-olds with exceptional observational capacity sometimes understood things intellectually before they could feel them, and she filed it in the part of her mind where she put things that needed more time to become something she could actually use. The back door opened and her father got in. He was still in his good coat from the concert, and he smelled like the cold air outside, and he sat beside Delaney rather than in the front seat, and that choice was itself information of the most important kind, that he had come to her rather than to the wheel, that the next thing he needed to do was this rather than any form of moving. He said, "The doctors have assessed her. She's stable. Her heart is okay. There was an irregularity, but they don't think it's caused permanent damage. She's going to need to stay for observation, and they're going to recommend a treatment program," Delaney said. "What kind of program?" "A residential program for kids her age," he said, "where they can help her learn to have a different relationship with food and with herself." He said the last part carefully, with the care of a man who was in the early hours of learning new vocabulary for something he had not previously needed to name. "It's going to take time. She's going to need a lot of support. We all are." Delaney looked at the hospital. She said, "How long has she been sick?" Her father was quiet for a moment. "The doctors think since the spring," he said. "Maybe longer. She was hiding it very well." Delaney said, "I know. I've been watching since July. I told Mom in October." Her father looked at her. His face did something complicated that he managed with the effort of a man who understood this was not the moment for his own reaction. He said, "I know, Mrs. Delacroix told me." He paused. "I should have been more available. I should have been someone you could tell directly instead of having to find another way around. I'm sorry for that, Delaney." Delaney looked at her father's face. She looked at it the way she looked at things she was trying to understand fully, without flinching from the complexity of it. She said, You're here now." Her father exhaled. He put his arm around her and she let him, leaning slightly into his coat. And they sat in the running car in the hospital parking lot while the Cedar Falls night settled around them, and Cora was somewhere in the lit building with doctors who were learning the shape of what needed to be fixed. After a while, Delaney said, "She said she wasn't mad at me. Cora, that she was right that I told." Her father tightened his arm around her. He said, "Of course she's not mad at you. You saved her." Delaney said, "I didn't save her. Thomas found Mrs. Delacroix. Mrs. Delacroix talked to the doctors. The doctors are the ones saving her." Her father said, "You started all of it." Delaney thought about this. She said, "I just kept looking for the right person. That's all I did." Her father said, "Do you understand how hard that is? To keep looking when the first people don't listen?" Delaney considered the question seriously, as she considered all questions. She said, "It's hard if you stop believing the right person exists. I never stopped believing that. I just had to find them." Thomas Hatch drove home from Jefferson Elementary at 9:15 with the heating in his truck turned up and the radio off, the way he drove when he needed the quiet. He had stayed for the full chair folding and the sweep of the gymnasium and the final check-in with the event coordinator, completing the volunteer work that was the stated reason for his presence at the school, the reason that had put him in the backstage hallway at the wrong time for the right purpose. He had not spoken to the Marsh family. He had not needed to. His part in the evening had been specific and contained and complete, a stage in a chain that he had initiated and that others had carried forward with the expertise appropriate to each subsequent stage, and he understood that this was how most good things actually worked, not through a single person doing everything, but through a series of people, each doing the thing they were equipped to do in the moment they were placed to do it. He called his daughter when he got home. She was 23 and living 2 states away, and they talked on the phone every Sunday, and occasionally on other days when one of them had something that needed saying. She picked up on the 3rd ring and said, "You're calling on a Thursday," which means something happened, he said. "Something happened," she said. "Good something or hard something?" He thought about it. "Both," he said. "A hard something that turned into a good something, because a 10-year-old girl kept looking for the right person for 2 months and found one tonight." His daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Was it you?" "It was me and a school nurse and a lot of other people." He paused. "But I was the first one who listened." His daughter said, "That's the important one. The first listener is the one that makes all the others possible." He thought about that. He thought about Delaney in the hallway with her patent leather shoes and her winter sky eyes and the 6 weeks of looking and trying and being told she was dramatic, and about the specific quality of her relief when he had said, "I believe you," not as an end, but as a beginning, as the opening of the chain that the evening needed. He thought about what his daughter had just said, that the first listener made all the others possible, and he understood it as a true thing that was also an instruction that the value of being receivable was not in the receiving alone, but in what the receiving made possible, all the subsequent action that could not occur until someone said, "I believe you," and meant it. The Heartland Riders. M.C. established an initiative the following spring that grew out of a conversation at their monthly meeting that Thomas had brought to the table with the same directness he brought to all club business. A 10-year-old girl had spent 2 months looking for the right person to receive critical information about her sister's health. She had tried her parents and a teacher and various adults in her orbit and had been dismissed or had assessed the available people as unlikely to act, and had eventually found a biker in a school hallway who had taken a wrong turn. The question the club needed to sit with was what this said about the availability of the right kind of listener in the communities they served, and what they could do to increase that availability. The initiative was called Open Ear, and it ran out of the school partnership program the club already maintained with the Cedar Falls district. They trained club members in the specific signs of disordered eating in children and adolescents, the concealed behaviors, the physical markers, the particular intelligence with which these patterns were often maintained, the way that smart children could structure restriction and exercise beneath the notice of adults who were not looking for it specifically. They brought in a clinical director from an eating disorder treatment center 2 hours away who spent a Saturday afternoon with the club's full membership going through case examples and teaching the vocabulary of early intervention and the importance of taking a child's report seriously rather than dismissing it as dramatization. They created a simple card with resources and warning signs that they distributed at school events and community gatherings, and they put it on their website, and the card spread through Cedar Falls and then beyond Cedar Falls through the networks. That information spreads through when it is useful and practical, and filling a space that needed filling. In the 2 years after the initiative launched, 3 separate families in the region reached out to the club after finding the card, reporting concerns about their children that they had not known how to escalate or had not found the right receiver for. In 2 of those cases, the concerns were confirmed and treatment was accessed earlier than it would otherwise have been. In one case, the concerns were assessed and found to not indicate a clinical problem, but the family reported that the conversation itself, with someone who listened seriously and helped them find the right professional to speak to, had been valuable in ways that went beyond the specific question they had brought. Thomas kept one thing from that December evening. Not the program itself, though he was proud of it. Not the commendation that the school district had sent the club in the spring, though he had appreciated it. He kept a note that had been slipped into his vest pocket by Mrs. Delacroix at a school event the following February, which she said had been given to her to pass along by a family she would not name. The note was written in pencil in the careful hand of someone who was working on precision. It said, "Cora came home last week. She ate dinner with us last night, all of it. She said it was one of the best things about being alive. We thought you should know. It was signed, D." He read it twice. He put it back in his vest pocket and kept it there, in the interior pocket close to his chest, where it stayed through every ride and every event and every wrong hallway he walked down in every school in Cedar Falls, available to be found whenever he needed to remember why the work mattered and what the work was for. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? That the children who needed to be heard most urgently were often the ones who had already been told their hearing was wrong, who had been handed back the note, who had been told they were dramatic or catastrophizing or too young to understand the complexity of what they were observing, when what they were observing was often the clearest and most accurate reading of a situation that the room contained, that the first listener was the hinge on which everything turned. That being receivable was not a passive quality, but an active one, a practice, a decision made before the hallway and before the sleeve grab and before the whispered 4 words, a prior commitment to the possibility that whoever needed to tell you something had already done most of the hard work by the time they found you, and that your job was simply to be the door that opened. That one biker taking a wrong turn to the restroom could be the 7th person a girl tried and the first one who said, "I believe you," without requiring her to earn it. That this was not heroism or extraordinary capability, but the specific ordinary consequence of a person who had practiced presence long enough that it had become automatic, who looked at people rather than through them, who was already listening when someone needed to be heard. Cora Marsh was in treatment for 7 months. She came home in August. She was a different kind of okay than she had been before September of the previous year, not the before okay, which had contained things she was still learning to understand, but a new kind that had been built with more knowledge of itself and more tools for maintenance and more words for what she needed when she needed it. She came back to Jefferson Elementary in the fall and rejoined the choir, and the music teacher asked if she wanted to reprise the solo she had not been able to perform the previous December, the snow song she had written herself, and she thought about it for a week and then said yes. The winter concert that year was on a Friday in early December, the gymnasium decorated by 4th graders with construction paper snowflakes and the borrowed risers that the music teacher was still requesting be replaced. The Heartland Riders were there in their volunteer capacity, folding programs and managing the hallway and doing the unglamorous necessary work of making public gatherings function. Thomas Hatch was at the main entrance when the Marsh family arrived, and Delaney came through the door in a new coat that was not the white blouse and dark pants of the performing students, because this year she was in the audience rather than the choir, and she saw Thomas immediately with the accuracy of someone who knew how to find a specific person in a crowd. She walked over. She was 11 now, and slightly taller, and her braid was more even than it had been the year before, assembled with more practice. She said, "She's singing the solo tonight." Thomas said, "I heard." Delaney said, "She practiced it this fall. For real this time. She ate dinner every night while she practiced. She said she was going to do both at the same time to prove she could. Thomas said, "Sounds like her." Delaney looked at him. She said, "I wanted to say thank you again. I said it in the note, but I wanted to say it in person." He said, "You did the work. I just received it." She said, "Receiving it was the work. That was the part that needed doing." He looked at this 11-year-old who had spent a year being right about the most important thing in her life, and watching it be dismissed, and then watching it finally be received, and watching her sister come home in August, and watching dinner happen every night. He thought about what she had said in the parking lot at the hospital, that she had never stopped believing the right person existed. He thought about what it meant to hold that belief through 2 months of wrong doors and turned back notes and adults who said dramatic and catastrophizing and "I have it handled." He said, "How did you keep believing the right person was out there?" Delaney thought about it. She said, "Because Cora believed it about me. She said I was the bravest person she knew. She said that before all of this, when things were still normal." She paused. "If she believed that about me, I had to believe it about someone else. It would have been wrong not to." Thomas held the gymnasium door open for the Marsh family and for the families streaming in behind them, the 300 families in good coats finding their rows, the grandparents making the drive, the fathers lifting children onto shoulders, the whole warm annual gathering of a community in winter assembled to watch their children do something in public they had worked for. He held the door and watched the people go through and thought about a girl with winter sky eyes in a backstage hallway and a wrong turn to the restroom, and 4 whispered words that had been waiting for the right ear for 2 months. He thought about Cora in the choir, about to sing the snow song she had written herself, about the long notes and the breath required to hold them and the specific health of a body that had learned to hold them again. About Delaney in the audience with her more even braid watching her best friend, who was also her sister, stand on the risers and do the thing that had been taken from her last December and that she was taking back tonight, one held note at a time. He let the door go. He went to his post. He was already listening. Thank you for watching this story. If it reminded you that the children asking for help most urgently are often the ones who have been dismissed the most, that the first listener is the hinge on which everything else turns, and that being receivable is a practice and a choice, and something you can decide to be before the hallway and before the sleeve grab and before the whispered words that someone has been saving for the right ear, please share this video. Subscribe to Bike Diaries because we put out a new story every single day, stories about the people who held the door and listened first and believed without requiring proof. Stories that remind us what we are capable of when we choose presence over performance and reception over management. Tell us in the comments where you watch this from and what time it is there, because our community is everywhere, and every one of you who stayed until the end already knows how to hold the door open. That is not a small thing. That is, in the most literal and important sense, everything.